there, and welcome to the Alberta Update, a first-hand look at what's happening in your province. I'm your host, Bruce McAllister. Thank you for being with us today. Well, there is no shortage of news in the province, in the country, in the world for that matter, and the Premier has been busy trying to deal with the unprecedented tariff situation from the United States. We're going to start by discussing that as we welcome in the Premier, who is freshly back from a trip to Houston. Premier, you must be running on fumes. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Nice to talk to you, Bruce.
Let's start with this. It's tough to keep track of the tariff situation in the United States. It does seem to change daily, even hourly sometimes, as you know. You were at CERAWeek in Houston. You've been making the case for Alberta energy. You've been making the case for Canada, trying to deal with everything diplomatically. What do you make of where we're at right now with the U.S., and what's your strategy in dealing with it?
Well, I had a number of meetings with officials as well as a number of appearances on various panels. And whenever I was asked that question, I said, well, I haven't looked at Truth Social for the last 10 minutes, so it might have changed. And so just keep in mind, whatever I tell you, it's the same kind of thing because it is moving that quickly. What I would say is that we began with a couple of things. The U.S. President talked about having tariffs that were related to addressing the border issues and fentanyl. And quite frankly, I think that Canada and Alberta in particular have risen to the occasion. We've put an extra $30 million of resources for specialized teams at our border, plus another $30 million in this most recent budget to tackle contraband trafficking. The feds have come up with $1.3 billion in combination. We've got dog teams, we've got commercial vehicle inspection units, we've got drones, we've got more personnel, we've got Black Hawk helicopters, and we're finding, quite frankly, that there is also a contraband coming up from the United States, crystal meth and guns and cocaine, and so this is a problem we have to deal with jointly. So the fact that we've got a czar in place means that I think those tariffs should be off the table. The second round of tariffs is just related to all of the trade irritants. And there's so many of them that the president identifies. That's why people keep getting confused about what it is really about. But it's pretty clear that because there is a buildup of a number of different irritants, the only way to address that is through a review and renegotiation of a comprehensive Canada, US, Mexico free trade agreement. And so the sooner we can get to that negotiation, the better. It's set to come up for renewal in 2026. I think everybody has an appetite to start negotiating it sooner. And now that there is a new federal leader of the Liberal Party who will become prime minister in short order, that should be the first matter of business. Calling an election so that we can get a 4-year mandate for someone to be at the table to renegotiate USMCA. In the meantime, we've also been hit with 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel. And I think that's related to those being two strategic metals and manufacturing capability that the Americans want to build up. And it's unfortunate, because they really should look at us as a secure supplier of that with a North American fortress kind of mentality. We haven't been able to make that case on those two commodities yet, but I hope we can.
Okay, listen, a lot there. Let me follow up on this. The new federal Liberal leader, soon to be Prime Minister Mark Carney, and some of your First Minister counterparts, including Doug Ford in Ontario, they're openly musing about putting a tariff on energy, on the oil and gas industry. I can't imagine how that's going to help our situation. You met with First Ministers yesterday. Can you share with us any of that conversation and what you are in turn telling them?
Well, I can tell you threatening to cut off energy is a very bad idea with this U.S. president. I think we saw how that escalated. When the president got word that there was the potential for electricity to be cut off to 3 major centers in the United States, he responded by wanting to bring tariffs up to 50% on aluminum and steel. And it was only when Premier Ford backed down that we ended up with just 25% on both of those as planned. It's not smart to play around with energy policy and to use energy in that fashion. I mean, that has started wars around the world. So let's just realize that we have to have a measured response, a proportionate response. And I think that that's what you've seen that the premiers and the federal government have come up with. There is $30 billion worth of goods that have been identified that have an easy replacement. I know it's painful anytime tariffs come in. I do not love the idea of a tariff war at all because it just hurts Canadians when import tariffs are put on. But the notion behind those first $30 billion was to identify products that could be easily replaced by goods coming elsewhere. All of the premiers as well have talked about suspending future purchases of US alcohol, as well as taking a buy local approach. We want to be able to, and we announced this too, we want our procurement practices to prioritize Alberta businesses, Canadian businesses, and countries that honor their free trade agreements. So I've seen those same kinds of approaches being taken across the country. Now that the new aluminum and steel tariffs are in, the federal government has announced another $30 billion worth of import tariffs. We're still going through that list to make sure that there isn't anything on there that's going to cause unnecessary hardship to our citizens and to our businesses. But that to me is what a measured approach looks like, is we can't afford to go dollar for dollar with the United States. They're too big. And our proportion of exports relative to theirs. It's just such a much larger part of our economy. So we've got to be measured in our approach. And my approach has been let's do Team Canada where it makes sense, but let's make sure that we're not going too far and then resulting in a counter reaction that is going to be damaging and destructive to the relationship and to both parties. So that's a little bit of the dance that we're trying to do right now.
Sounds a lot like common sense, Premier. So, listen, let me ask you about this. Part of the reason you were in Houston is to tell Alberta's story, because we can't rely on a federal Liberal government to tell our story for us. We know that. And it would appear that there actually is a business case to export LNG.
No kidding, hey? I mean, this is the thing I've
Who
been
knew?
frustrated by for some time. And when I've talked about using energy as a trump card, I'm thinking about it as in the exact opposite way that everyone else is. Let's not talk about selling less. Let's talk about selling more. Let's not talk about curtailment. Let's talk about doubling our oil and gas production and finding new markets to be able to send it to. So the 0 week theme that we had a couple of major press releases that we did and announcements. The first one was we have an Alberta Petroleum Marketing Agency that is able to cut deals with different jurisdictions and refineries around the world who want to buy our products. So you'll see that we're closing in on the final stages of being able to negotiate the first such deal with a European refinery. But we have, now that we announced that, we have others who are approaching us saying, "Hey, what about us?" We know that Japan came to Canada, South Korea, Netherlands, Germany, and other jurisdictions saying, do you think you can help us out? And the federal government, in one way or another, has either said no or there's no business case. Well, what we wanted to firmly assert is, you bet there's a business case. And if you're interested in having those conversations, don't come to Canada, come to Alberta. And I think that message has gotten through loud and clear. So I'm looking forward to seeing similar types of agreements. We just renewed our agreement with a Japanese company as well to continue developing both new technologies, as well as find a way to get some of these traditional fuels to Japan. And I'll be going to Japan for a trade mission in April, where we can further that conversation with them as well as with South Korea. So I think that there's this is the way that we should be exerting ourselves in the world. Yes, the Americans have been incredible trading partners and great customers for our product, but if we need to diversify our resources, let's do that too. It doesn't need to be one or the other. It can be both.
Exactly. Nice to see some of the Eastern politicians starting to realize that, as you just said, Premier. Listen, we could talk about this all day, of course, but I want to ask you about something else, because you're governing here, and there's a lot going on. And you just passed the budget, or sorry, you just tabled the budget last week. Part of that is a huge income tax cut, one that you promised to deliver, and you're delivering it at the same time as a deficit budget. And with what's going on with inflation and everything else, it's a good time to give Albertans a bit of a break. Tell us more about your strategy.
Well, I did not love having to put forward a deficit budget projection, but we also had to be realistic and honest with Albertans about what our current turmoil means to us. If oil prices stay low, and I think they're around $65 of WTI, I've said in the past we need $75 oil or $74 oil in order to balance that. That cuts into our revenues. If the differential widens because of tariffs, that also cuts into our revenues. And if we end up with with tariffs causing job losses, that also will reduce our corporate and personal income tax. So we had to put forward a worst case scenario budget based on what a lower revenue picture would look like, and as a result, that's what resulted in the deficit. And then we had to make a choice about, do we delay the tax cut further? And that was the argument I made last year. I was worried about the instability in prices and worried about running deficits. And what we heard from Albertans is we're hurting and we need the relief now. And when you're in a tariff war where prices are going to go up, we made a collective decision that delivering that tax cut now would be one of the ways that we'd be able to offer that relief to tax-paying families. So we've given them $1 billion that will help people defray their costs and be able to meet their priorities. And then we're going to work very hard over the next 3 years to get back into surplus if this uncertainty continues. That being said, if oil prices go up, if the differential narrows, if we have a resolution on the tariff dispute, then that is going to dramatically impact our revenues to the positive. So I want people to rest assured, I care just as much about deficits and tax cuts as everyone else does. And we know that people have an expectation that we're going to get back into budget balance, and we'll be working overtime to do that.
Premier, I know Albertans are grateful for your advocacy. I think many Canadians are as well. Thank you, as always, for taking time for us as well.
You bet. My pleasure. Thanks, Bruce.
All right, there is Premier Danielle Smith on the Alberta update. In other news, it is no secret that Alberta's population is booming, and that is putting a great strain on the education system. That is why the Alberta government continues to put our school kids first as they take bold steps to deal with burgeoning enrollment numbers. Budget 2025, if passed, will commit $1.1 billion over 3 years to address enrollment growth. The funding will allow school authorities to hire more than 4,000 teachers, education assistants, and support staff so that students can receive more of the focused time and attention that they need. Here is our Education Minister, Dimitrios Nikolaitis.
This year, taxpayer investment will reach a record $9.8 billion, which represents an increase of $426 million or 4.5% from last year. This historic investment not only supports enrollment growth, but also raises grant rates and puts more money into the classroom by giving school boards the flexibility to make decisions that best serve their students. More than 98% of education's budget flows directly to our school boards, who can deliver services to students. Our goal is to drive as many dollars as possible into the classroom, and we give our boards maximum flexibility in how they manage their resources.
Since 2020, student enrollment has grown by almost 89,000 students, and school authorities, particularly in the Edmonton and Calgary metro areas, are expecting continued growth in the 2025 and 2026 school year. Well, as part of the Unsheltered Homelessness and Encampments Initiative, the province and federal government signed an agreement in December to strengthen existing provincial investments into supporting the most vulnerable. The province is making yet another huge step in committing to helping the homeless in Alberta. Now, through this agreement, about $35 million in federal funding over 2 years will support the province's efforts to reduce homelessness. With Budget 2025, again, if passed, investing $213 million into homelessness initiatives. These projects include investments in shelter safety, accessibility and capacity, as well as transitional housing and supports for Albertans experiencing unsheltered homelessness. Here is the minister responsible, Jason Nixon.
In our province, we recognize that encampments are just not a safe place for vulnerable people to live, especially during harsh and cold winters. Encampments are dangerous. They are places where vulnerable Albertans have frozen to death. They have been victimized by gangs, and far too many people have lost their lives as a result of that. That's why we have in Alberta taken action significantly to increase supports for available shelter, for support services, and for specialized housing across the province. Last year, we made the biggest investment in homeless supports in Alberta's history, nearly $220 million. And through Budget 2025, we are investing even more in this upcoming year on this important issue. Since creating Alberta's Action Plan on Homelessness, Alberta's government has been working diligently to support Albertans experiencing homelessness and helping to make homelessness brief and non-reoccurring.
The minister also pointing out that since establishing the navigation centers in Edmonton and Calgary to provide social service supports for the homeless, More than 9,000 unique individuals have been connected to life-changing services. Well, Alberta is growing rapidly, as we talked about a few minutes ago, and with that growth comes the need for more smart infrastructure investments to keep our province moving safely and efficiently. And that man who joins us now has a big task in front of him, dealing with major roads and bridge projects in northern development, the big cities, everything else. He is the Minister of Transportation and Economic Corridors, Devin Dreeshen. Good day, Minister. Thanks for popping by.
Hey, thanks, Bruce, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It's got to be a tough job, because I know everybody wants their project, and you have to prioritize for the province, and you are always going to take heat no matter what you do. That said, there is a project that you're moving forward that I think all of Albertans have been waiting for, the extension of Highway 686 and some other northern infrastructure projects. They contribute to economic growth in a big way. Maybe speak to that first, then we'll get into some of the other things.
Perfect. Well, you're absolutely right. Obviously, rural Alberta, and especially northern Alberta, contributes so much to the province and also to our budget. Billions of dollars of royalties come from northern Alberta. And Highway 686, not just on the economics of royalties coming in, is important even on safety egress, or having other access points of northern communities in case of wildfires or disasters to be able to get to safety without having to go through one way in and out through certain highways. So Highway 686 ultimately is going to go west of Fort McMurray, going to Peerless Trout Lake, and it'll be a new highway over 200 kilometers long, which the 3 First Nations that are along that new highway we've consulted with, and they're wildly supportive of this project for all the reasons of opening up economic opportunities and jobs, as well as for safety egress in the area. So Highway 686, really connecting northern Alberta east to west, is a big project, and something we're really, really positive to see that in Budget 25.
Perfect, Minister, and the Indigenous commitment huge there as well. I'm glad you brought it up. Listen, Budget 2025 includes a significant investment in transportation and water infrastructure, and I think it's $8.5 billion. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. How will the projects improve daily life for Albertans and support long-term economic growth?
Well, overall in the province, we have about $75 billion worth of road and bridge assets all across the province that the province owns. And so being able to maintain those highways and bridges obviously helps people get to school, get to work, and be able to get around our beautiful province in a safe manner. So the huge amounts of investments that are going to maintain those roads and bridges are obviously part of this budget. We got a 4% increase just in transportation and economic corridors budget. So that's something that there's going to be lots of projects all across the province that will help, every corner of the province and people being able to get home safely.
Hey, let's talk about photo radar for a minute. I've been hearing Albertans complain about photo radar forever. That said, police will tell you that it's a necessary resource to deter drivers, speeders, and those who might drive dangerously. But the last thing you want is budgets being padded by photo radar. So your government is doing something about it. Tell us what's happening and how it's being received.
So we've eliminated fishing holes in Alberta. Something that, to your point, we've heard from so many Alberta drivers that they feel that they're being taken advantage of in certain areas, whether it's at transition zones, at the bottom of a hill, not clear signage or awareness of certain photo radar locations. And obviously they're in places where they're actually very safe roads. So something that we've done, we've engaged with municipalities that use photo radar and law enforcement to make sure that we could come up with a compromise that still uses photo radar as a tool to make sure that we can have safe roads, but that it won't be used for government revenue generation. So we have municipalities making tens of millions of dollars on photo radar tickets without actually seeing a benefit to any of the safety metrics that they'd have in that area. So that's something that come April 1st, there's going to be new guidelines. All the fishing hole areas will be removed in the province, and any new locations are going to primarily be in school, construction, and playground zones. But there is going to be exemptions for municipalities to be able to say if there's a really bad area that needs some sort of extra enforcement, that they're obviously going to be allowed to make the case for that to happen. And then obviously a 2-year audit by the provincial government to make sure that it's not being abused as a location. So some big changes coming April 1st.
Listen, when April 1st arrives, the potholes will arrive with them. Of course, the frost comes out of the ground, and that means road and highway maintenance. It's that time of the year again. That's going to be a big part of your budget. How do you go about prioritizing that and every year to contribute to keeping the roads safe for everybody?
So we have 25 capital maintenance contracts for around the province, and we've seen an increase in 5% in this budget if it gets passed for more dollars going out to make sure that we can fix those potholes or ruts, or be able to make sure that ditches are trimmed, and obviously in the winter that roads are plowed. So that's obviously a very important aspect of our budget, to make sure that capital maintenance is there when it's needed. And we have a great set of almost like an army within the department that goes out to try to find out where they need to be able to put this really important investment. And it's something that we will also work with municipalities and just Albertans to be able to call in to say where there's a pothole, so that they know where to go to fix them.
Minister, I mentioned off the top of the interview here that the rapid growth in the province is one of the reasons that you are so busy. I think it's that way with every ministry. That said, how do you balance the need for new roads, the need for new projects with upgrading existing infrastructure? Obviously, you need to crunch those numbers, as you did before you brought the budget forward. But this is the time of year when you need to do it.
Yeah, you're right. And there's, whether it's health or education, the number 1 and 2 largest spending ministries, they're obviously depending on growth and population growth, but also transportation is the same way. A great example was the ring road in Edmonton on the southwest side. It was eventually to be planned to go out to 6 lanes, but in 20 years from now. But the amount of population growth that happened in that area meant that we had to add an extra bridge and actually add more lanes on that ring road to be able to accommodate for the population growth. So even in transportation, you see these, it's all planned out, it's all carefully engineered with our civil engineers. But when there's a huge demand of more roads being needed, with about 500,000 new Albertans showing up in the last 3 years, that obviously puts a stress on our road network, and we have to make sure that we keep up.
Well, hopefully Highway 2 is fairly busy with Oiler fans heading down to watch the Flames in the long playoff run this year. We'll look forward to that, Minister.
We want to make sure that they get home safely. You bet.
A little shot at my Oilers friend. Minister, thank you as always for your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much.
There is the Minister of Transportation and Economic Corridors, Devin Dreeshen, joining us. Well, Alberta's government is modernizing the province's professional regulatory legislation. Currently, Alberta Advanced Education administers 9 pieces of legislation supporting 28 regulations that govern 22 professional regulatory organizations. If passed, the Professional Governance Act would consolidate and streamline advanced education's professional governance legislation from 9 separate acts into one, ensuring that all affected professional regulatory organizations are held to the same high standard of practice, including the requirement to protect the public interest. Here is the Minister of Advanced Education, Dreeshen.
Many of these disparate pieces of legislation are also outdated, especially in terms of provisions for the use of modern communication and technology. Outdated provisions would be repealed and replaced to recognize technological advancements and bring advanced education's professional regulatory bodies up to date. For example, usage of electronic signatures, electronic records, delivery of electronic notices, and virtual meetings. The Act would fix inconsistencies or lack of information in current professional regulatory legislation, including providing clarity on the purpose of professional regulatory organizations and their authorities, powers, and functions.
The Professional Governance Act covers professions regulated by advanced education. That includes accounting, engineering, and geoscience, veterinary medicine, and architecture, among others. Well, with all the talk of tariffs, another minister who has been very busy is our Ag Minister, R.J. Sigurdson. He joins us now to talk about the impact on the ag sector and to chat more about what's happening on that front. And it is a lot, Minister. I know you're one of the busiest members of Cabinet right now. Thanks for taking some time to chat with us.
Well, it's a great time to be here, Bruce. Talk about an issue that, of course, is front and center to our farmers and ranchers and our agri-processors in the province right now.
Yeah, well, like I said, we appreciate it. Hey, let's start with this. With nearly 600 producers and over 800 products already part of the Made in Canada labeling program, can you explain the Made in Alberta label and how consumers can use it to identify products that are made here in our province?
Absolutely. This was an initiative that started a couple of years ago. What we heard from a lot of our Alberta producers was that both globally and locally, consumers were looking for a clearly identifiable way to be able to draw them to those Alberta made products. So the province launched the Made in Alberta label, in which we do have 600 producers now actively displaying that on 800 different products. It's actually been very successful, both on the marketing globally of Made in Alberta, but also allowing a lot of our consumers here to be able to look right on the shelf, see that Made in Alberta label, and know that they're buying and supporting local.
Minister, one of the we're talking a lot about the tariffs from the U.S., but we should mention the tariffs from China. They're having a big impact, certainly on the sector that you represent. So let me follow up with that a little bit. I know it impacts canola oil. I know it impacts pork. In your opinion, how critical is it for Albertans to be buying local right now? And what are you telling people about those tariffs?
Well, definitely when we see the tariffs, our approach here in our department is understanding that there are short-term things we can work on that are going to have an immediate impact. And then, of course, the medium and long-term strategies that we're working on in light of these tariffs. But one of the most impactful ways that we can support our producers, our agri-processors here in the province is exactly that. Buying local is the quickest and fastest way for us to be able to support our agricultural industry right here in Alberta. We see a lot of our grocers already moving to displays in which they're displaying Made in Canada products as well as Made in Alberta products. We're very thankful for that cooperation. I see that groundswell coming, and I'm really thankful to everybody that is making those decisions to be able to buy local, support local, for the impact that it's having in supporting our farmers and ranchers here in our province and all across Canada.
Yeah, I guess it gets difficult when you think about balancing the long term efforts with the immediate needs, as you just touched on. I'm going to get you to follow up on that, but first, some context. We've been talking as well about interprovincial trade barriers and trying to do something about those. So, what other immediate measures, Minister, can you work on? What else is being considered to help Alberta's food producers?
Well, definitely, when we're looking at our long-term or medium and long-term strategies, interprovincial trade is top of mind. We conducted a Lloydminster pilot that was hugely successful, a partnership with Saskatchewan that had a really positive outcome. And in light of the tariffs right now, we have been meeting. I've been meeting with ag ministers across this entire country. It has really brought to the top of that discussion how we can continue to support each other by increasing and improving interprovincial trade, and we see a lot of interest in that from other ag ministers right now, really coming together and understanding that in the light of these U.S. tariffs and the looming China tariffs too as well, that the best thing we can do is support each other from coast to coast to coast.
I've heard you talk about the $250,000 Buy Local initiative, the strategy for Alberta's ag industry. How is that being employed? How is it working, Minister? And is it going to have an impact, hopefully, for the better for the ag industry?
Yeah, absolutely. The $250,000 is going to be our forward-facing campaign that we're going to be rolling out in the weeks to come. We're really going to be promoting buying local and really highlighting the amazing commodities and food products that we have right here in the province of Alberta. With that as well, we're going to find some creative ways through, of course, we have our madeinalberta.co website that displays the Made in Alberta products, but also we're looking at innovative ways for consumers to easily identify when they're in a grocery store, made in Canada and local products, and understand where even the ingredients of those products come from. We've seen that through similar apps called O Scanada and Maple Scan apps that have come out. One of those was actually developed by two individuals here in Edmonton. These are resources that we know we're going to work with and to be able to allow consumers to easily identify those food products so they know that they're buying local and supporting local.
Minister, one more quick question. I know your phone has been ringing off the hook. You're on it constantly, talking to stakeholders around the province, to farmers, to producers, to ranchers. Look, the U.S. is a very good friend of ours, has been for a long time. How would you say the general mood is amongst the producers and ranchers, and pretty resilient bunch, I would guess.
Absolutely. We have the best farmers and ranchers in the world, Bruce. We really do. And listen, our farmers and ranchers have seen adversity before and they've always overcome it. I mean, we are Albertans and we see that, there's going to be challenges that hit us every day, but we do overcome that. What I saw when I was down in Washington, even at the convention, NASDAQ convention, with secretaries of departments of agriculture from all across the U.S., they understand how important Alberta is as a trading partner. Our food supply chain is very integrated from north to south, and I continue to spread the message down there that we are stronger together, and that this trade relationship, this partnership we have, is essential to food security and also food affordability. This is something our Premier herself has been tirelessly traveling and making sure she's connecting with individuals in the U.S. to spread exactly that message on the agricultural front and, of course, on all fronts, including energy and other sectors. And I'm very, very thankful to have a premier who is leading in this very important time and approaching it in a diplomacy way that's really having an impact and actually making a difference.
Look, I'm glad you brought that up, Minister, because we talk so much about the energy industry with good reason. It impacts so many, but maybe ag doesn't get the headlines as much as it should. I know you and the Premier are working tirelessly for our producers and ranchers. Thank you for that, and thanks for taking some time to visit us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Bruce.
There is the Minister of Agriculture in Alberta, R.J. Sigurdson, joining us on the Alberta Update. Well, Alberta's government is cutting red tape for Alberta's charities by introducing changes that give charitable groups much broader discretion in determining how gaming proceeds are used to support their programs and services. This opens up more options for how charities can spend their gaming revenue on delivering services without delays or the need for additional approvals so that they can better support Albertans. Here is Minister Danielle.
Alberta's charitable gaming model is unique in Canada. We are the only province that licenses charities to conduct and manage casino events that support charitable organizations. This model has made Alberta one of the most generous provinces in Canada, raising over $409 million in proceeds in 23-24 alone. With these latest policy updates, we're building on that success and giving our charities the tools they need to support Albertans. Red tape reduction, at its core, is very much about making sure government can get out of the way.
The updates shift the focus of AGLC policy to the types of activities and programming a charity can use their gaming revenue for, rather than based on their organization type. The policy amendments will appear in Alberta Gaming, Liquor and Cannabis, the AGLC Charitable Gaming Policies Handbook, and will come into effect on April the 1st of 2025. And that does it for this week's edition of the Alberta Update, a first-hand look at what's going on in your province and with your government. A reminder, you can find us on YouTube or Rumble or any of the socials as well. We do this every week that the legislature is sitting, and we will be back again next week. And with all that's going on, who knows what will have happened by then, but we'll do our best to stay on top of it for you. So thank you for being with us this week, and we'll see you again next time.